Keeping an influence-free opinion on the internet is hard. When I got my review code for Biomutant on launch day, I made an effort to avoid discussions on the game, to keep my opinion neutral, preferring to give my own thoughts on the game as I have experienced it, separate from the wider gaming public. But in today's internet landscape, that endeavour is kind of impossible. With the way our articles, thumbnails and social media are presented, avoiding these influences is easier said than done. Despite having never watched or read a single review of Biomutant prior to me starting the game, through these mediums, I'd already comfortably gleaned the generally mixed reception from the gaming community. In our modern clickbait landscape, something you yourself have probably experienced by clicking on this video, it's nearly impossible to avoid discussions of media in your sphere of influence. If you're interested in a game, a hobby or culture in the algorithm sphere, you can't avoid it. This meant that early into my playthrough of Biomutant, I had a general idea of the opinions surrounding the game, and the kind of motions I was likely to expect. I was aware that the game was janky, it was ambitious, likely buggy, and pretty unique, but more so I was seeing that many people weren't really recommending the game. Generally, the reason I avoid these influences before playing a game is so I don't have my opinion swayed or changed. But with this general idea in mind, that people were not particularly praising the game, I found myself wondering if some people might have missed the point. Because don't get me wrong, Biomutant has things to criticise and justify negative opinions, but I feel in this instance, it maybe isn't fair to review this game in isolation. Because I think in a lot of ways Biomutant highlights the issues with the way we standardise the review format. Since playing the game and comfortably getting my own thoughts on it, I found a lot of the opinions on the game pretty harsh. I think with Biomutant we see a flaw in the way we approach the discussion of video games based on a quality tier, between the big budget and lower tier games. Because some of the ways people are comparing and holding Biomutant up to a certain standard seems unfair for the game it is, and I wanted to offer a counter to some of that, while giving an objective and fair review of the game on my own. In almost every sense, Biomutant is a PS2 game. It's a callback to the older days of the more open and experimental gaming market, and at the same time it has a lot of modern problems, deep mechanical issues and flawed designs. My playthrough was frequently punctuated by incredible highs and some serious lows. There were times in the early hours where I loved this game, and others where I was downright blown away by its scale. All of it's such a mix of pros and cons that the game should probably be considered quite average. Still, regardless, I think that Biomutant is something worth championing, something very rare in the modern gaming landscape that I think is worth recommending and defending. So let's talk about it. But before that, I want to ask if you can like the video, and if it's your first time here, consider hitting subscribe. That way I can continue to make new and better quality videos. I never usually ask people to subscribe till the end when most people are bounced, but I wanted to test something out here. So yeah, with the experiment over, let's move on to the review. Biomutant's weird. Its story's weird, its systems are weird, its graphic style is weird, and its world is weird. At times it feels like the game itself is shrugging its shoulders at you as you try to figure out what it is you're actually playing. When you boot the game up, you'll be greeted by the narrator, and you should get used to his voice because it's pretty much the only one you'll be hearing. Taking inspiration from Little Big Planet, the entire game is narrated with almost every action taken, dialogue encounter, and even just standing around narrated by this omnipresent voice. Like everything in Biomutant, it's a mixed approach that at times charms and others can grate. Trust me, you'll be hearing the mixed opinion thing a lot in this review. So much so that a recent patch was announced to turn the feature off. Set in a post-apocalypse, Biomutant goes one further than even Automata on the post-human Earth scale, with the world having readapted with a mutated fairy animal life and finding itself again on the verge of another end. The world tree that holds this new green and purple radiated utopia together is dying, and you the player, as is so frequently your role, will take up the mantle of the lone saviour in charge of the world's impending fate. Even with some interesting setup, Biomutant's story gets mired in its influences and never quite adds up. Despite the impending end of the world, Biomutant's inhabitants seem frequently uninterested in that fact, and you never really get the sense that the world is in the peril danger that the narrator continues to tell you that it is. With its frequent themes and inspirations from feudal Japan, samurais and martial art culture, it pokes at themes like eternal recurrence, natural selection, and the balance of nature, but rarely uses them to say anything interesting. Rather like its own quest design, Biomutant frequently gets distracted from its own points to go on tangents. Biomutant's narrative can best be summed up by the frequent nothing proverbs it throws out. Side characters will often spew out faux philosophical proverbs about life, choice and sacrifice, delivering the narrator's storyteller tone. At the time I found it novel, and then an hour later I talked to a different side character who said the exact same proverb. Still, there's a lot to like in the world of Biomutant, mostly in the nonsensical logic, the weird mix of post-apocalypse and stunning Eastern-inspired greenery, and, well, Beaver Elvis. Trying to actually describe what kind of game Biomutant is, even after playing it, is difficult. The game has influences from disparate areas of the gaming landscape. At times it feels like a PS2 era Ratchet & Clank style action platformer. At others an Assassin's Creed game that would fit perfectly into Ubisoft open world repertoire. It's an RPG with an extensive and in-depth weapon and class system. It's an action game with a fighting game style combo system. It has platforming sections, puzzle sections, mech combat, boat combat, weapon crafting and loot systems, with unlockable magic attacks, and Jesus, if this game gets any more mechanics I'm gonna have an aneurysm trying to explain it. This is sort of the beauty of Biomutant, it doesn't give one iota of shit about the consistency or polish. At times it feels like Experiment 101 were pretty much just adding mechanics into their basket like they had an unlimited credit card, because pretty much everything is in here. Biomutant is enough to give you whiplash with how often it changes and adds mechanics. Is it an RPG? A combat focused action game? A looter? An open world sandbox? Yes! All of these gameplay systems are covered in enough jank you'd think it was held together by flex tape.
That's a lot of damage!
The game barely holds 30 frames at the best of times. You get stuck on the environment so often Fallout 76 would be ashamed. And dialogue options are so nonsensical and weird, it's like every conversation has been put through Google Translate and then read back to you based on the results. When I first started playing the game, I thought it was a mess. The combat was clunky and floaty. After being given a confusing tutorial where a giant bear pummeled in my face, a question of which path I'm going to take suddenly revealed a morality system personified by the two most annoying voices in the game. And one of my first combat encounters ended with me being thrown into apparently toxic black goo. One of the many environmental hazards that the game will throw at you across its world. By the end of my first few hours I was pretty much ready to write the game off as a broken mess. But I kept at it. As the world opened up, its loot and crafting systems came into play. Its faction system abruptly appears on your lap, and you sit there like that one meme with that guy overflowing with stuff, just trying to get to grips with it all. And it was while trying to get to grips with it all that I realised I was starting to kind of love it. I mean, I still didn't fully understand what I was playing, but that was kind of the best part. I had absolutely no idea what to expect or what I was playing. The game has a great sense of progression, and as an RPG you feel your character getting stronger, so Biomutant isn't just stats and RNG. You as a player begin to understand the combat better, and as you do, exactly what Biomutant is trying to be becomes more clear. I was suddenly filled with that feeling of finding a weird bargain bin PS2 game that you'd never heard of and decided to pick up based on the box art. Biomutant began tapping into something really rare in a lot of games today. You can tell it's kind of just having fun with itself. I was still getting frustrated. The combat tutorials do a really poor job of conveying the mechanics, and the bionics, psyops and wung fu abilities just add further confusion to a system that actually isn't that complicated. For all the weird naming and jargon, Biomutant's combat is basically just Batman Arkham at its core. That sentiment goes for a lot of Biomutant's designs. It has a tendency to make things more confusing than it actually is. The loot system with weapon stats, status effects and armor ratings all basically comes down to pick the thing with the highest overall stat. Throughout my entire 15-hour playthrough, I only ever encountered a few fights where I actually had to use status effects. The karma system, while initially presenting itself as an interesting balancing act of light and dark, turns out to be even more basic than the Fallout 3 system of help these people or nuke this fucking town. This one is pretty disappointing since the game tries to make a point of the importance of inner balance and harmony. Yet in reality the options are side with the people trying to bring peace, or side with the group who are trying to literally end the world. Like I said, pretty much all of Biomutant's many systems end up being fairly basic when you actually pull back the radioactive skin. Yet, and you'll continue to see this theme, the game is still really compelling. It's absolutely full of charm. Did I mention the Beaver Elvis? Its world moves from weirdly inventive to downright stunning at times. It frequently changes up its gameplay, and its Ubisoft-esque open world collectathon actually gets quite addicting, leading me to a couple of late nights where trying to complete the main campaign led me down a rabbit hole of side quests, hidden bunkers, and dopamine dripping area completion quotas. For every one side quest you finish, the game is usually dishing out 3 more along the way. Biomutant's actual campaign is relatively short, around 9 hours, but it's pretty much impossible not to end up getting involved in the various side activities the game throws at you. This isn't always a positive, sometimes it can feel like it's overwhelming the player, as it piles on the excursions, and as you get later into the game you start to realise that side quests start to blend into one, throwing out reskinned objectives and locations. Again, everything in Biomutant is covered in a layer of jank. You can practically feel the developers throwing in gameplay styles and ideas on the spot, because they thought it would be fun. I haven't seen a game this excited to just try things, both for better and for worse. I found the game's earlier hours to be the best, when the game is doling out new locations, biomes and side quests at a decent rate. It had that sort of hypnotic feeling of exploration that a Far Cry game would. I like that straying from the main path usually turned up something interesting, and that the game gives you ample freedom to explore at your own pace. With the stunning variety of locations, the game has surprises around every corner. The open world is designed in a way that complements and rewards exploration. When I entered the Dead Zone, a toxic desolate wasteland, a quest to defeat a World Eater, it's in the name, it's one of the big creatures destroying the World Tree, then led to a quest to acquire a mech, which then led to a hidden bunker, which then led to an irradiated power plant that was too toxic to enter, which then led me to a quest to find a signal box, find a radiation suit, and you get the idea. In the early hours, the quest and progression fit together for a great sense of flow. Biomutant's world is frequently stunning, with lush jungles, looming desert mountains, blue lagoons, and open plains, making a world I was eager to explore, at least early on. If Biomutant feels like a throwback in a lot of ways, then it's the modern parts that feel like they bog it down. It's ironic that last gen, the biggest issue was short campaigns, because it feels like bloat is this generation's biggest problem. As I said earlier, a lot of Biomutant's designs feel inspired by Assassin's Creed and Ubisoft's open world tricks, and Biomutant inherits all the repetitive side quests and padding of the publisher's usual designs. This means that by the second half of the game, side quests and exploration that I was previously enjoying was abandoned due to tedium. I knew each quest would be some variant of find the old thing, do lame puzzle, get a piece of useless legendary gear. It's a shame because the later areas are stunning and I'd loved an excuse to explore them. Biomutant highlights that sometimes less is more. Because if they'd have delivered half the quests, made them more varied and unique, with actual character arcs and stories, and then spread them out across the map, I think they'd have been a lot better all around. The game could have benefited from some leaning. I don't need every game to be an MMO light. I can barely sit down and play games for a few hours a week. Just inject the good stuff and cut the fat. Because the main quest is good, it's varied and takes you across a stunning selection of areas. I like the variety of weapons, though enemy variety is a bit lacking, which is surprising considering how many unique character designs the game has. Overall, the game's biggest problem is a modern one. There's a lot of padding in here. By the end of my playthrough, the feeling that I had the most was that Biomutant feels like a PS2 game in every sense, mixing the popular gameplay styles of the current gen with that eclectic eccentricity of the 6th generation's booming middle market. Just playing a game like this on the current gen feels odd, and it had me feeling kinda nostalgic. It's been so long since a recent release felt this experimental, since a new IP tried something that was genuinely a little out the box. And I do want to talk about the way people are responding to this game, and why that's kind of an issue with the review process. While I was browsing Twitter, trying to avoid discussion of the game, I saw a tweet retweeted by God of War director Cory Barlog, by game director Megan Fox, that read, "The reviews of Biomutant remind me heavily of the Days Gone reviews, and a few others. I'm seeing a lot of, this game is bad because it doesn't live up to AAA standard, and just, yeah, no shit, 20 people. Sometimes they say I understand it's only 20 people, but, and resume AAA comparison. This is kind of the issue with the flat review system. When you release a game at full price, it has to be rated based on the general standards that that price point and product is held to. This has led a lot of people to review Biomutant in line with releases like Assassin's Creed, Resident Evil and Mass Effect. To a lot of people this seems fair, right? After all, you're paying the same price for both, why wouldn't you expect the same quality? But rating Biomutant to this metric just isn't fair to the game, the developers, and the product they are trying to make. Ever since THQ Nordic took the THQ name and a bunch of their high profile IPs, it's perhaps given people the impression that the company is now a big developer, in line with the old THQ. However, that just isn't the case. Biomutant is a AA game, defined as the middle market between indie and big budget. This means that the game's budget and development power is far less than that of the typical AAA product. Experiment 101, the developers of Biomutant consisted of just 18 people in 2018. For reference, Sledgehammer Games, the developers of last year's Call of Duty, consisted of 200 plus employees, and even with that manpower they received development assistance from Raven and Treyarch. Biomutant's expansive world and impressive opening cutscenes may cause people to put the product in line with the big releases, but in truth it should be more in line with these games. When you check these expectations, you realise just how impressive Biomutant really is. Like I said, it's janky, and by the second half the game's tricks do start to become a little repetitive. So much so that the game practically gives up on its faction and conquest sections, allowing you to just bypass it entirely and skip half the map with a hasty surrender. The game's initial variety and gameplay additions do start to dry up, and combat can become a little repetitive when you settle into a set of particularly overpowered weapons. But by that point I'd already hit the 12-hour mark. And I remember that when I played Assassin's Creed Odyssey during lockdown last year, I barely made it to 5 hours before I was getting bored of the game. While it sounds like I'm making excuses for the game, and in a way I guess I kind of am, I think it's worth noting because with these things in mind you realise just how impressive Biomutant actually is. It delivers a huge, varied open world with some stunning visual design, a unique blend of gameplay styles and influences delivered in a refreshing way, and an old school carefree attitude towards blending and trying new things. Biomutant does have quite a few flaws. The story never really comes together, the narrative style of the novel does start to grate, and in the later half I found myself skipping dialogue, as the fairy inhabitants of the world began spewing the same half-hearted proverbs. The game can get repetitive, and technically it can run terribly at times, with frame dips, visual glitches and cutscenes breaking at regular intervals. But I still find Biomutant easy to recommend, in spite of all these issues, because the game has one goal in mind: fun, and in that sense it meets it. Biomutant frequently punches way above its own weight. It's crammed to the brim with half-committed systems, conflicting designs, and a unique blend of mechanics that work to varying degrees of success. But ultimately, I found the game to be a ton of fun all the same. When you get to grips with the combat, engage with the game's open world exploration and character building, the game shines with that sort of diamond in the rough charm of the bargain bin days of the PS2. I felt like I was playing one of those weird 2 for $20 discount games you found in the local Blockbuster during the PS2 days. The kind of game you try unsuccessfully to explain to your friends because it's so weird and hard to define. Biomutant represents the exceedingly rare mid-market of yesterday, the experimental jank that isn't always polished but is always exciting, and I think that kind of experimentation is worth supporting. Experiment 101 did deliver on their namesake with this one, and if something a little different and rough on the edges is your sort of thing, I think Biomutant's creature features might be worthwhile. With the quiet summer drought still playing out, I think Biomutant might find some fans. If JRPGs and survival horror games aren't really your thing, then THQ Nordic's latest is a fun, different little game that I had fun with despite its clunkiness. Its overall charm and fun gameplay outweigh its negatives, though I think waiting for a sale or a price drop might make some of those issues easier to swallow. I can see a lot of people still enjoying its throwback charm. Not every game has to be a polished masterpiece, or every story the next great critical work. I had fun with Biomutant, and I think it deserves some praise for being a good middle tier game that tries some ambitious things by a small team. THQ Nordic have really rejuvenated the middle market with games like Darksiders 3 and Remnant from the Ashes, and Biomutant is another charming addition to the catalogue. Now I definitely don't think some of the average reviews and critical reception are unwarranted. I feel like Biomutant is a good reason for why we should check our expectations at the door. In many ways it maybe does deserve the 6s and 5s that people are giving it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't worth playing. Biomutant is fun, it's flawed, and it has issues, but I did enjoy it. I think flat number ratings, seeing 8s and 9s at the end of reviews, have sort of trained our brains to really dismiss a lot of games. It can be very easy to just go to a Metacritic score and judge a game based on that, without really ever knowing what it is. Biomutant really highlights the issue with this. It is deserving of the 6s for some people, its flaws will be too much to overlook. Overall I get why the reception for Biomutant is the way it is. But I wanted to offer a counter to that, to maybe highlight why a game can be enjoyed despite these issues, and that it should be praised for the things that it does, because it does do a lot of things well, and I feel like that might get lost in the criticism and average reviews. This isn't going to be the case for everyone. I know some people won't care that the game was made by 20 people, or that it has some good things among the bugs. They'll only care about the bugs and the £40 price tag. But if you're someone who's willing to overlook these things and support the middle tier of games, I think this is worthwhile. I think Experiment 101 did something good here, and I hope it does well enough for them to carry on with their crazy experiments. Thanks for watching. I wanted to get this review out a week ago when it was actually relevant, but you know, life, work, bills, the usual. I enjoyed making this shorter, more straightforward review, so I will hopefully stick with this format and get to deliver some more content more regularly on this channel. Again, if you like the video, consider liking and subscribing. The more likes the video gets, the more the algorithm likes me, and the better content I can make. Until then, thanks for watching. See you later.